let's go on to that then, because we also identified sort of the white issues, because of course, you know, it only became in when I started out in my training, you know, it only sort of recently become available into awareness, really, in the middle 80s, as I recall it, as sort of racism being a white problem, you know, that actually it's nothing to do with black people or people of color, or you
Yeah.
know, it's the white person's problem, which is obvious, of course, when you think about it. But at the time, you know, that was quite a new concept. You know, there was a book written by a woman called Judith Katz on white awareness, and there were a number of books in that and along that vein, you know, that made it really, really clear that, yeah, this is a white problem, actually. And that also does fit in with the Rennie Edo Lodge book that we talked about in our sort of preparation for this, which is, you know, entitled "Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race." You know, so it all sort of fits into that, doesn't it? So what are your sort of senses about, you know, white fragility, white privilege? Let's talk about white fragility. Let's start with that, because that one's less talked about, isn't it, than say white privilege, which is becoming much more commonly acknowledged
Yeah.
now. You
And I
know,
think
whereas,
that came to the
yeah,
forefront with the Black Lives Matter movement. I think
yeah,
that
go on.
really came to the forefront with George Floyd.
Yeah, say more about
Um,
that.
so I feel like people wanted to be supporting the Black Lives movement
Yes.
a lot more, to say that actually there isn't white privilege here. We aren't racist. There was a lot of, I think that was something to talk about for this season. And I think
Go on.
that then went away. And then when you bring those topics up, then people don't want to talk about it anymore. It's a bit like that was something to talk about for a while while
Right.
everybody was distracted.
Yeah.
It distracted us from a pandemic. It gave us something else to focus on. We wanted to support um, at that time.
Yes.
And the we are supporting, the police force is not racist. We are supporting people of color.
Mm.
But then when that started to die down in the news, people don't want to have those conversations again because they feel like that's been done, and any conversations that come up after that, it's a bit like people don't talk about it after that. And if you do approach kind
Right.
of
Right.
conversations about
Mm.
race, people get
Mm.
very uncomfortable, they get very
Right. Right.
protective about it, or they say, oh yeah, but I don't believe in what happened with George Floyd. It's like, yes, no, nobody agrees with what happened to George
Yeah.
Floyd at all.
Yeah.
But just because you don't agree with it doesn't mean that you're um not uncomfortable about talking about this, or you're combative to having these discussions. You can
Yeah.
support and not agree with something, but that doesn't mean that you're also avoidant of having the conversations about your own behavior towards these
Yeah.
things. And I
Yeah.
think sometimes it's those conversations of, oh yeah, I'm not racist, but,
Yeah. Yeah.
or, and it's when you're having those
Mm.
conversations with people and they're denying your experiences because they can't see it
Mm.
from anybody else's point of view.
Mm.
So, um,
Or even the "I'm not racist," you know, I
yeah,
mean, even if somebody doesn't have "but" at the end of it, you know, it's like, "I'm not racist, what do you mean?" You know, in
yeah,
this society, you know, of course, how can you not be? You know,
yeah,
how can you not be? Um, but yeah, what I think you're saying there is about, you know, the white fragility, the white sensitivity is another way
yeah,
of putting it,
yeah,
but that might appeal to white people more, but it's still I think fragility is a better term, actually.
yeah,
But you know, where people are kind of sensitized. So in, you know, the Emmanuel Acho's uncomfortable conversations with a black man, for example, you
yeah,
know, where he has a group of white police in from, one of the states that was open to having that conversation. And got them all in a room, had a chat with some of them, and it was quite interesting. And he like he said, like, well, when did you last have a black family round to dinner? And nobody could sort of come up with anything, and so his idea there was the idea about proximity, and the sort of further, the more distance you are away from a group of people, then the less likely you are to understand them, so bringing people into your proximity and into your circles and so on, would be less likely to sustain a sort of prejudiced kind of position in a sense. But he deliberately, he'd say things like, well, let's get uncomfortable, let's talk about this. So it was quite good that I found when watching his videos with white people, when he would sort of say, let's get uncomfortable, it kind of gave permission, didn't it, for that whole notion. Whereas, as you say, in the normal sort of course of events, and this might come up in our conversation about experiences of racism in counselling or supervision, but encountering that sort of white fragility, white sensitivity about, well, I don't agree with what happened to George Floyd, therefore I'm not, let's not, we don't need to talk about this then, do we, sort of thing.
And I guess it's sometimes that fragility of them just they're kind of preventing people from wanting to if there's someone a person of color that wants to have that conversation, when they're just like, I don't want to talk about it, and they're quite resistant to it, because whether it's, and it's not saying that person's view is racist, but it's having that open conversation, but they don't want to explore those feelings around it.
Yes.
And it's not knowing whether that comes from fear or whether that's from anger or guilt or anxiety. We don't know, but it's not being open to even having that conversation.
No, I think it could be all of those feelings and more, in the sense that, admitting the problem a bit as what's going on more widely in the country about now, there's the whole sort of anti-empire thing really gathering pace, isn't there? And it's kind of like, well, what sort of reparations? Ultimately, we're going to reach a point where what sort of reparations is this country going to be prepared to make then to the countries that they went and in and pillaged, people and the resources? What reparations going to be? So I guess there may be a fear about what's going to be taken away from me, or what have I got to give away? I don't know if I'm sort of going into that greed instinct too much, being a bit over cynical, or whether the fears are sort of there'll be a wide range of issues, won't there?
And I wonder whether it's also that person of, they just don't know what to say, of saying the wrong thing. And then they're like, if I say the wrong thing, then I'm going to come across as racist.
And to my mind too, there's no real consolation, in a sense, that you can offer for something that is so, deep rooted and fundamental in society. When I think about it, well, I can't offer consolation for it, because that would be ridiculous. Do you see what I mean? The wound is far too, so yes, there's lots of things, but I think what's important is for it not to go underground, therefore, because everyone's uncomfortable.
And I've always been one of those people that I would rather have an open conversation about it. If you say something and it comes out the wrong way, then it's okay that it comes out the wrong way. I'd rather you have that conversation, or we can have that open dialogue around it. And that we both feel better about it, or if that person gains some clarity about something, that
Yeah.
we have that rather than nothing be said,
Yeah. Yeah.
because that just creates more friction or more uncomfortableness then.
Yeah. Yeah, yes, that's right. It becomes the elephant in the room, doesn't
Yeah,
it? It becomes the, and it begins to take up more and more space, and then the space for real conversation gets
yeah,
smaller and smaller, doesn't it?